Good morning, everybody. Um, this video is just going to finish off yesterday's lesson. We didn't quite get to the end. There were 38 slides in the slideshow, and we got as far as slide 33. I just need to just bear with me. The program I use to record these videos always has to start at the beginning of the slideshow, so I've just got to scroll up to the point that we reached. I'll do that now. Okay, there we are. So we've got two more strands to look at in this double lesson about the basic law. Remember, the sort of key thread of the lesson all the way through it has been to look at the way in which the basic law, the so-called constitution of the new West Germany, or the Federal Republic of Germany to use its proper name, or as the textbooks will often refer to it as the FRG, Federal Republic of Germany. Okay, so we're looking at how the constitution that was drafted and published in May 1949 was deliberately a improvement on the Weimar Constitution. The decision was made that clearly mistakes had been made when the Weimar Republic was founded in 1919, and that constitution was drawn up because there were loopholes which enabled Hitler to take power. And of course, when Hitler took power, he abolished the federal states, created a centralised dictatorship, and Adenauer and the other 64 members of the Parliamentary Council that were tasked by the Allies to write the Basic Law. Their starting point was to look at the strengths and not to sort of throw out features that had worked. So one of the key decisions was they brought back the federal states, and that was the last strand that we looked at last lesson. And we need to now sort of pick up on this issue further in this final part of the lesson. Okay, so in a nutshell, so the new West Germany was in most respects a fully functioning country in its own rights. Okay, now obviously from what we studied yesterday, there were clear exceptions to that rule. I mean, Berlin or West Berlin was clearly a special case, for example. But in most respects, West Germany was a fully functioning country. In other words, the Allies have given Germany, or the Western zones, back to the people, the German people who live in the Western zones, and it's now a sovereign country. In other words, the German nationals who live in West Germany, for most intents and purposes, have been given back full control, economic and political, over their own country, which is quite staggering, really, considering this is just 4 years since the end of World War II. However, it has been described, and I think you need to be able to you need to use this term when you're writing about this in the exam, not as a fully sovereign country, but as a semi-sovereign country. Okay, so a semi-sovereign. And what this basically means is, a fully sovereign means that the German people would have absolute full control over the political and economic life of their nation. But that wasn't the case. Okay, there were certain things, certain aspects of rule that the Allies, the Western Allies, that is, America, Britain and France, still retained direct control over. Okay, and that's what we need to look at here. Now, that included, they retained direct control over 3 geographical regions within West Germany. And also they retained direct control over some significant aspects of government. So there's two things there. Firstly, the Allies retained direct control over 3 geographical regions, and secondly, the Allies retained direct control over some significant aspects of government. So we just need to be clear about what they are. So firstly, the 3 regions. Okay, so let's just go into the details of this. So the new FRG, remember FRG is just the word for West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, was a functioning republic. Okay, so it's a country in its own right with an appointed president who's the head of state and a chancellor, the head of government. But it has been described by some historians as a sovereign state. This is because the Western Allies continue to maintain significant powers over the Western occupation zones and sectors through the occupation statute drawn up at Potsdam. So do you remember what we talked about yesterday? We talked about West Berlin. There we are, the yellow bit, okay? That region there that we're looking at is the whole of Berlin, but the western part of Berlin was not technically part of West Germany. We looked at that yesterday. The people who lived in West Berlin were still subject to the occupation statute, which was the arrangement made by the Allies at the Potsdam Treaty in 1945. So they were basically subject to a different set of rules. Now, they are West German people, and therefore they had, as we said yesterday, they had certain key rights, and to a large extent, yeah, they lived lives as if they were West Germans. They lived free, democratic lives. But remember, they had to they elected their own, effectively, a West Berlin council to govern their affairs, which was overseen by the Allies. They were allowed to participate and to vote in West German elections, remember, but they were not allowed to, although they could send 22 representatives to the West German Bundestag, those 22 representatives are not allowed to vote in the Bundestag chamber for the passing of West German laws, etc. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We talked about that yesterday. So we're just extending that to say it wasn't just in West Berlin. There were 2 other regions where this applied. So what were these regions? Okay, so there were 3 West German regions not directly controlled by the West German government. So West Germany did not officially control the western part of Berlin, which was still subject to control by the Western Allies. So that's the point we made yesterday. Okay. Just tick that off. The new West Germany also did not control its main industrial region, the Ruhr, which at that time was under the power of the Western Allies through an organisation controlled by the Western Allies called the International Ruhr Commission. So the Ruhr is the area in brown there, which was West Germany's largest industrial region. Okay, so that was controlled by the International Ruhr Commission. And then you've got the other region, which was the Saar. Now, the Saar, as I mentioned in the lesson yesterday, was, again, just to show you where it is, there in green, okay, a much disputed area right on the border of France, which was very, very rich in raw materials, so therefore hotly disputed. And actually, in the mid-1930s, the people of the Saar voted for their region to be part of Hitler's Third Reich. Okay, it was a disputed area at the end of World War I, which is why at the end of World War I it was put under international control. Well, similarly, at the end of World War II, it was decided that the Saar would be put under French administration. It was still part of West Germany, but it would be put directly under French administration, and it was known as the Saar Protectorate. It wasn't part of France, but remember, France is one of the 3 allies. So again, that's one of these 3 West German regions that's not directly controlled by the West German government. So this is therefore a key reason why West Germany, the West German government, was not a fully sovereign state, because there were 3 regions it did not have full control over. Those 3 regions were controlled by the British, the Americans and the French. Then Other points. The new West Germany was not allowed to have its own foreign minister. Okay, so was not, just highlight that for you, it was not allowed to have its own foreign minister. Now, obviously, a fully sovereign state, one of the key members of the government would be the foreign minister, who has the power on behalf of the delegated power to, for example, sign foreign treaties with other countries. West Germany was not given that right. That power was taken away from it. So the new West Germany that was created did not have its own foreign minister. Foreign affairs instead would now be decided by the Allied High Commission. Okay, so that was a body consisting of Britain, France and America that would decide on West Germany's foreign relations. Likewise, the British, the French and Americans, as the occupying powers, retained full control over military matters. So the new West Germany, very importantly, was not allowed to have its own army. Okay. And likewise, other matters that would impact on the strength of the army, the purchase of materials from abroad, foreign trade. It was also decided, and we'll do more about this, to decartelize West Germany. Remember, cartels were these huge industrial concerns that linked together, and that had been a feature of Germany since 1871. And the Allies, again, one of the key things is we have to basically make sure we do not allow a situation where another Hitler can take power in West Germany. So that's why they built in all these safeguards, such as West Germany not allowed to have its own army, but also the issue of cartels. It was the cartels that, in a sense, put Hitler into power, these big business, these big industries that backed Hitler into power. So that was another sort of feature of West Germany, was to break up these big businesses and make them into smaller businesses. That's what we mean by decartelisation. And also, the Allies retained full control over scientific research of military significance. Okay. And then the final aspect that the Allies retained control over was all laws passed by the Bundestag, the West German Parliament, had to be signed off by the Western Allies, Britain, France and America. Okay, so those sort of four factors. First of all, the three West German regions, and then secondly, the point about foreign affairs. Secondly, the point about the military, and thirdly, the point about signing off laws, were all limitations on the sovereign powers of the West German government. Okay, so that's the sort of point that we're making there. And then the final strand is just really an assessment. Just pull it all together. Okay, you need to be able to articulate the strengths and the weaknesses of this new West Germany. So in a nutshell, on the whole, the Basic Law was a significant improvement on the Weimar Constitution. I think that's obviously got to be a key point, because it retained its strengths, but it removed its weaknesses. And it introduced new features which improved on the Weimar Constitution. So that's your narrative, in a sense, when you're writing about the Basic Law in the examination. A key difference which helped was that the Western Allies after World War II were keen to learn from the mistakes of the past. Maybe think about what we've been talking about here, is that both the Western Allies and also the Germans, who had been delegated the task of forming their own country again, the West Germans, their starting point in every way was, we need to rebuild a country in the Western zones, and we need to make sure we don't make the mistakes that our forefathers made in 1919 after World War I, because the Weimar Republic that was created in 1919 clearly as great as it looked in theory on paper, it didn't get it right, because ultimately Hitler and the Nazis were able to take power and take Germany into the Second World War. So it's largely about not repeating the mistakes of the Treaty of Versailles. And that willingness of the Western Allies not to punish Germany, and that was obviously a sort of fundamental bit, that our starting point mustn't be to punish Germany, because that's in a sense where we got it really wrong in 1919. The German people felt aggrieved by the Treaty of Versailles. They felt they hadn't been treated fairly or properly. Okay, and so we're not going to punish. Remember, that was the whole reason that West Germany came into existence, because it was disagreement over reparations, wasn't it? Okay, remember that was the important factor, is that the British, the French and the Americans on one side fell out with Stalin over the reparations issue. Okay, and that's why West Germany was formed. So that willingness not to punish Germany was a key factor in why the new West German Republic was so successful. Now, you haven't studied the history of West Germany yet, but we're obviously moving into that fact. What then happened between 1949 and 1990 that made West Germany such a successful country? Okay, so this is sort of like looking at the foundations of that. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And the remaining couple of slides just really develop that in a little bit more detail. So the Parliamentary Council that drew up the Basic Law aimed to be guided by the Weimar Constitution, okay, rather than to radically break with it. They were determined to build on its strengths and improve on it, and in particular to move to a system that would create more stable government. So some of those key features we've looked at: the voting system of personalised proportionality was an adaptation of the Weimar proportional representation system. It didn't bin it, it took the proportional representation and strengthened it, made it better. Okay, it was partly proportional representation, but it improved upon it. That's just an example. Okay, nevertheless, the retention of some proportional representation meant there were still 12 parties, and as a result the main government would usually be a coalition government. But unlike the Weimar Republic, the coalition governments in West Germany worked. Okay, so that's something that you'll get an understanding of as we go through the next few lessons of Depth Study 4. They were coalition governments, like the same as the Weimar Republic, but in the Weimar Republic the coalition governments fell apart. They argued with each other, and the president stepped in and dismissed the chancellor, and Article 48 came into effect until they could form a new government, and eventually they just basically gave up faith in democracy, which paved the way for Hitler to take power. That never happened in the West Germany. Okay, coalition governments worked because of all these particular things that we've talked about. You know, the constructive vote of no confidence, and so on and so forth. Those particular points. So, in contrast to the Weimar Republic, the new FRG was helped considerably by the occupying powers. Okay, so I think that's another key feature. Okay, if you go back to the Weimar Republic, the Allies at the time, the victors, you know, in particular the British, the French, and the Americans in the 1920s treated Germany differently. They treated Germany in the 1920s as if Germany was the guilty party. Okay, Germany was effectively punished. So, but now the British, the French and the Americans are eager not to repeat the mistakes of the Versailles Treaty. So the Constitution was a key factor in the recovery of the Weimar Republic. It implemented democratic rights for all citizens within a federalised system, as had the Weimar Republic, but in addition ensured that extremist parties would not be able to play a role in the FRG's political system. So, for example, we looked at the 5% rule. Now, in the Weimar Republic, the 5% rule did not exist, and so that provided a foothold for small extremist parties like the Nazis to get into the Reichstag, as the lower house of parliament was called, whereas in West Germany there was that 5% rule that meant that small political parties simply could not get into parliament. And also by adding a constituency type vote, in addition to the party list vote, that's the way the voting worked, personalised proportionality, the basic law provided the German people with a personalised connection to the Bundestag. Okay, so the German people were not just voting for names on lists, people they didn't know. They were actually voting for a person in their area that represented them directly. Okay, so they were more therefore directly engaged in politics than they had been in the Weimar Republic, and that was clearly a weakness of the Weimar Republic voting system. It didn't engage people with politics in the same way as it did with the new West German system. Okay, so there we go. We finished off the lesson. Flip learning for the next two lessons next two lessons will then look at Adenauer and the Christian Democratic Union. That's the political party that he was the leader of. So he was West Germany's first chancellor, and he was chancellor throughout this period. Okay, so we'll look at who he was and what his policies were. We'll spend two lessons on that, and as I said, in the exam, if you answer a question on Depth Study 4, the classic question is why was the West Germany so successful? And clearly one strand is it had a very, very effective constitution. Another strand is obviously talking about Adenauer himself, okay, his personality and what he added to West Germany, and how he helped, how he took the constitution and made use of it, okay, to strengthen West Germany. So read pages 138 to 42 of the textbook, and as you read, think about those two possible essay questions that are put there for you, okay? And think about how you could use that information to answer those questions. That's it, okay? Hopefully that was useful for you to finish off this lesson, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you.